As I said at the top of the show, today we're going to talk about fake news, social media, and what we need to know about our children's online habits. And joining us to talk about it are two professors and researchers from NC State University. We have Dr. Adria Shipp Dunbar. Dr. Dunbar is an assistant professor in the College of Education, and next to her is Dr. Meghan Manfra. She is an associate professor, also College of Education at NC State. So thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
All right, fake news. We can't get away from hearing that term on the real news or whatever the real news is, right? So I want to start with you, Meghan. Sort of tell me a little bit about sort of this sort of cultural phenomenon that we sort of now has become this term fake news.
Yeah, in many ways, fake news has become the headline. So as you mentioned, it was the word of the year in 2017, really because of the impact it had in the 2016 presidential election. So since that time, we've been really trying to figure out, the impact not only on that election, but in general on our political and civic life. And I think part of why it's so significant today is just the way it's been industrialized. So we see so much of it being produced like never before. It has a real partisan edge, and also it can spread so rapidly.
When you say industrialized, what do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, people are producing fake news on their websites to generate ad revenue. And so one of the big things that happened after the election, a lot of the big tech companies like Google and Facebook have returned to their policies to try to think about ways to limit the money people can make off of fake news.
Right. Now, Adria, I want to talk to you about one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about on the show was this is a show about education and teenagers particularly, but really children starting at a very young age are online almost all the time. Sort of what I think a lot of the focus of your research, not just about fake news and also learning, but what you call digital health.
Yeah. So the work that I do focusing on adolescents is, they are not only trying to be online at all times, but with things like one-to-one initiatives in schools and social media, online is reaching adolescents pretty constantly. So what is digital health? We've talked about health for years, and kind of going along with that is this idea of digital citizenship and critical thinking and how we act and kind of our moral and ethical behaviors online. So it's all interconnected. But
and we just pulled up on the screen, by the way, we've got a chart that's showing sort of how much teens are online. So we talk about the difference, between, really just in the last 5 years, how much of a difference is in terms of being online almost constantly.
Right. Yeah. And being accessible constantly, right? And so what does that mean for what we're teaching kids in schools? Or what does that mean about what we're teaching kids at home, their parents? And what are we modeling for kids with technology?
Yeah, so when you talk about, we're talking about teaching them, we started talking about fake news, I'm hearing a couple of different things. One is, I think, being a better consumer or understanding sort of, how to critically think about what you see, but also just the overall usage, maybe screen time, maybe that's what the term the parents say. Where does that come in? How do you balance those things, Meghan?
Right, so we talk a lot about media literacy, which I think you were referencing there when you talk about the actual skills that students need to develop when they're online. For instance, to go visit the About Us page, to understand who's produced the site. But then also I think what Adria is referring to as well is that we can't shirk our responsibilities as educators to teach students how to go through or use social media. So sometimes schools will ban social media and things like that, but in that way we're really kind of giving up our responsibility to help them become good citizens and use that.
Right. I mean, it's funny you mentioned about banning social media, and I know there's some that have blocked certain stuff, but I mean, it almost now seems kind of, I mean, it's rapidly changed. I mean, I've got a teenager, but just in a few years, she was from middle school to high school. The idea of you can't bring any devices to school, to now like bring your own device because almost everything we're going to do. I mean, that's changed, right?
Yeah, and I mean, with social media, I mean, I don't even know that kids are thinking about it as social media the way that we think about it. It's their Facebook, it's their Instagram, it's their Finstagram, it's their Fakebook, it's their, but they all have them, but they don't think about it like
I found out about Finstagram a couple of years ago. If viewers don't know that, a lot of times maybe your child lets you follow their Instagram, but they may have another one that you don't know about.
Yeah, and what's interesting is some adolescents are talking about that as a means for digital health. because their Instagram is one that, we talked about popularity, and that's the one that's out there for all the likes and all the comments and the pictures. But that's overwhelming to teenagers, to adolescents. So in some ways, their Finsta is not necessarily always to be underground with their parents, but that's their smaller circle. That's how they can kind of limit the back and forth and the pings and the notifications that they're getting all the time, and to sort out what matters and what doesn't matter.
Yeah, we're just showing on screen right now the most used platform. It's funny, we talk about Twitter all the time, again we talk about President Trump, but that's actually, among teens, is actually the lowest used. YouTube, huge. Instagram, huge. Those are really the big ones, right?
Right, yeah, and if these are sources for information, it's kind of interesting to think about who's producing them and how they're being produced and what kind of messages teens are receiving.
All right, so what do I guess, first of all, let's get to, so what's the problem that, what do we need to be aware of, and then what are some potential solutions for parents and teachers?
Well, I think that from a social studies perspective, I think bringing this into the classroom is important. So we need to support teachers. Sometimes they're afraid to bring in these issues. They're controversial. We know when we talk to social studies teachers, for example, they were wary of teaching about the election in the first place. But it is a good opportunity to model really healthy sort of civic discourse, and then to also teach some of these civic online reasoning strategies, like laterally reading on the websites, seeking out contradictory information and things.
And from a digital health perspective, what do you think about?
I think reflection. We set a lot of rules with technology, both in schools and in homes, and that's helpful to some degree, but I think adolescents and students of all ages really need to be thinking and self-reflecting on how they're using these sites and how they are thinking about what they're reading, what that means to them. So instead of just having kind of the law of the land, I think we need to really push them to reflect on that comment that they made, or a comment that was made on their page, or something that they read online, and having deeper conversations.
Does it, is there a connection with digital and things like anxiety, stress?
Oh yeah, anxiety, stress, depression. We know that they're all on the rise. Suicidal ideation, that FOMO, fear of missing out. It's real, and especially for this next generation who's come up with where technology has always been a part of their lives. It's having a huge impact on their mental health.
Last word from you.
Well, I just think that one of the important strategies here is to address it, to acknowledge it. I don't think that we've really dug in with students and let them know that we understand what they're going through and that we want to work with them.
And I guess, and probably try to model some good behavior ourselves. I'm going to try to work on that too. So,
good luck.
Look, thank you so much for being here. Interesting topics.
You,
we'll have some links on our website for viewers who want to learn more about your work, and also some great resources from Pew Research. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
When we come back, you're going to meet North Carolina's Poet Laureate. But before we go to break, see if you can answer this question. True or false, lower income teens are more likely to gravitate toward Facebook than those from higher income households?